Okay, so the interview has started. Today is December 1st, 2021. I'm here with Alyssa Ock. She's in her last year of environmental design in the landscape branch, and I will just dive right in with the questions. Okay, so question one, what is landscape architecture? Just a general start.
Landscape architecture is the study and practice of designing with greenery, and it can be within the built and natural environments. And it can include outdoor areas, landmarks, structures. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Structures. Okay. So, getting into trophic rewilding, how important is the concept of trophic rewilding to your career?
It depends on the scale that you work at,
Okay.
and what you're looking at going into. If you're just looking at doing like residential landscaping, which is what I am doing and what I've been doing for the past 4 years in my personal job. But if you're working with firms that do larger projects, it's going to be a little bit more important. It just sort of depends at what scale and level you're working at.
Okay, sounds good. Okay. As a landscape architect, what makes a plot of land fitting to introduce trophic rewilding to?
It's going to depend on what you're looking for. I mean, trophic rewilding is you're looking at introducing species like from a top-down like scale. So if you are looking at a site, you're going to want to be looking at areas that have some sort of unbalance in its ecosystem. So this could be like an overabundance or a lack of a specific species that you're looking to reintroduce. Yeah.
Okay. Just finishing up my writing. Okay. So what are some important factors you take into account before you restore a land?
A big one is going to be looking at the area's capacity. So the capacity could be like a broad like set of values, but it's going to be looking at sort of like how many animals can this area sustain, and then going like down the scale, what sort of vegetation can fit in this area, how much can fit in this area. And then you can go even further to that and start looking at how that area affects the surrounding areas. So if it's right next to human population or cities, how is the introduction of these larger species and species higher on like the scale, how are they going to influence other areas?
Right. Okay, thank you. Okay, what kind of species do you typically target in Manitoba in rewilding?
Rewilding in Manitoba is a little bit interesting. We tend to focus a lot more on the rewilding of vegetation, which can go hand in hand with trophic rewilding.
Right.
So in Manitoba, like you could look at the Living Prairie Museum, where it's just a preserved section of native prairie grasses from hundreds of years ago. And that sort of area is going to bring in wildlife and insects that would have fed on those grasses like hundreds of years ago. So we focus a lot more on like the vegetation side of things, which can introduce a lot of these larger species, but we do a little bit more trophic rewilding in terms of we do it with the fish. If you look at things up north, like the what's it called? The Delta Pass, I believe. But up like by Netley Creek, we did a lot with some fish. They had like an overabundance of, I believe it was carp. So we introduced a species of birds that would feed on them, I believe. and it sort of went hand in hand that way. But yeah,
Right.
we focus a lot more on vegetation, and we have, in my opinion, a lot more baseline concerns than introducing large species in Manitoba. We kind of have to go the opposite, in my opinion, and start with our soils and wetlands and vegetations first.
Perfect. Okay, that's what I was thinking. I wasn't exactly thinking there would be a whole lot of animals there. Okay,
Yeah,
awesome. Okay, what are some conflicts that come with trying to restore a land that is heavily populated with humans?
I mean, there's quite a few that you can kind of like dive into.
Right.
It comes down a lot to how much, I guess, humans are willing to give up in their urban development. I believe like, and humans are like fairly like selfish in terms of like their nature. So if you walk into the middle of the city and you see, like, you're just going to see basically what people are start calling a concrete jungle, and trying to introduce animals from top down into areas like this is difficult. And you have places that, well, like Winnipeg, where we have like an abundance of deer surrounding us, and people always say like they're starting to become major pests, and how do we get rid of them? And one thing that they've done in other places around the world, and albeit less populated areas, is that they've reintroduced, and well, not reintroduced, but like repopulated things like wolves and coyotes and cougars and stuff, in order to manage that deer population. But we can't exactly do that here, because people aren't going to exactly be happy if we have now like wolves and stuff running around close to the city. So it's more of like it's hard to find that balance in what people are willing to give up and accept, and what you would actually need to rewild like more urban areas, or areas close to urban populations.
Right. I feel like it's not really talked about in Winnipeg, like Manitoba, like that never really is like a thing, like reintroducing like species. Like it's not like as like important. Like they don't try to like make it seem like it's important. I feel like unless you like actually go into it and you like do a lot of research on it and stuff, like you don't hear about it. So I was interested in that actually. Yeah. What else do I have? Okay. What specific changes do you make to a plot of land to try to attract wildlife to it? Like not just here, like anywhere, I mean.
Well, a big like one of that is going to be your vegetation.
Right.
So what are these, like, what's this wildlife going to feed on? Are you wanting to attract more species that live in trees? So if you want more birds, you're going to introduce like plant varieties that drops like fruits and seeds that they're going to want to feed on. And then you could start introducing like more squirrels or mice, that type of way. If you're wanting to introduce more like deer, those kinds of things, you're going to introduce like plants that have like berries and like taller grasses and vegetation that they'll want to feed on. It would also have to do with their what those animals would feel safe in. So if you want to attract like wildlife, you're not going to have a complete open field. You're going to create areas for them to den in and to burrow in order for them to also feel safe. So you have to think a lot about their habitats as well, if you want them to live on the area of land that you're trying to create.
Right. Okay. Perfect. Okay, my next one is, okay, what problems have you seen arise, if any, in Manitoba when rewilding? Like if you have experience in that, I mean.
I could talk a little bit about it. Might not be in a sense of actively trying to rewild areas, but I can do a little bit with sort of the monocultures that like we kind of have a trend going with.
Sure.
In the residential landscaping for sure.
Okay.
There's been a lot of very like a select few plant species that landscapers are very, very fond of now, that we tend to plant in almost every single backyards that we see, which can create an issue for attracting certain wildlife or insects, or trying to maintain a diverse landscape like in Winnipeg. So, which is like an issue. You want to have that diversity so that you can introduce like a whole lot of these other species. So
Yes.
Trying to diversify those species in the landscape, and might not necessarily be rewilding, but just sort of like it can help in turn a little bit with that. But I always try and include like more native plantings in a lot of in my field. So
great. Okay. Okay, and you do residential landscape architecture then?
Yeah.
So rather than like rather just like traveling and like in the city and stuff, like, or
yeah, so I would typically do like a backyard landscape.
okay.
I wouldn't do any well, we've done like a couple like community centers,
Okay.
but I wouldn't be designing like parks or
Right. That's what I was thinking.
like
okay.
a Birds Hill type area.
Yeah. So. Okay, interesting. Okay. Okay, only if you know any, but if you have an example of an area that has resulted in trophic rewilding, it can be here or just something you've seen in like school, like something that's been introduced to you.
There's one, I can't remember. We don't learn about it in school because we don't really touch too much about it in like on trophic rewilding. But there's one project, I think it was in the Yukon, where I think it was the Yukon, I can't remember. You'll have to double check.
That's okay, yeah, just whatever you.
But they had reintroduced wolves into the the area because their deer and moose populations were just getting completely out of control.
Okay.
So they had actually reintroduced wolves, and they basically like airdropped them in like crates, like from helicopters and stuff, in order to get them there, and it worked. It helped control that population there, and they're slowly getting back to like normal numbers of deer and things like that. So that's one example I can think of, but
okay. No, that's
perfect. It's not really touched too much on.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking you would know like or have too much experience in doing exactly that on your own, but I've just seen. Okay. Awesome. Okay. How do you attain minimal possible human intervention to help ecosystems grow?
Like in terms of us like planning and designing them, or like maintaining them?
I guess in maintaining them and helping them grow and everything.
I mean, your main one is wanting to make sure that obviously like our like us as in like people don't have a lot of interaction with them, and that things that we've created like chemicals don't have a lot of interaction with them, which is fairly hard to do nowadays. But you want it to be self-sustaining, so you're going to want to make sure that species, whether it's plants or animals, aren't going to be invasive and take over, and I don't want to say ruin the area, but sort of decrease its chances of cycling itself like over and over again, and being able to maintain itself and create its own maintenance system. So yeah, you just want to make sure that you have species and that are just going to help themselves and relate to each other as well.
Okay, if you know what the difference between open and closed habitats.
Oh man.
If you know it, that's just kind of.
I believe like an open habitat is, well, I know a closed habitat, or maybe I'm thinking of ecosystems, but I know that it's runs itself and sustains itself like within its own grouping.
Right. Okay.
And an open habitat is going to have like influences from a variety of different like places and things. And I believe that's what I'm thinking of. I might be thinking more like ecosystem, but I think it relates anyways.
That's okay. I think that kind of runs along the same lines as that. Okay. Okay. I think I just have one more. Okay, what are some economic benefits of rewilding that you've seen, if any?
I know for like economically, rewilding can have major benefits in terms of the amount of money we spend on maintenance for areas. I guess this is more so talking in terms of plant species, and if you want to talk trophic rewilding, you can relate to it as well. But when you're rewilding areas, you're typically going to want to introduce native species, whether it's animals or like plants. And a lot of the times these native plants, because they've been here for so long and they're used to these soils and they know the spaces, they're typically going to be able to maintain themselves. And for plants, you're not going to need to like cut them back every year or make sure that every single weed in that area is gone. Like these are going to be things that are going to maintain themselves. So it can definitely cut down a lot on the maintenance side of things. You're not going to need to water them at all because here in like the prairies, these plants and animals are going to be, like I said before, used to these conditions, and they're going to be able to thrive whether we're in a drought season or a flood season. They're going to be able to sustain themselves. What else?
Is there any drawbacks from rewilding that you've seen? Like any negative to like the economic section?
I guess this kind of counteracts the point I just said, but you can have a lot of invasiveness. So if you're rewilding certain areas, like a lot of like these populations, whether it be plants or animals, always have the potential to get out of control again and create that unbalance. So you could be like, yeah, I'm going to plant this area of like native grasses, and then next thing you know, like these grasses start spreading and spreading and spreading and growing, and next thing you know, your entire yard's covered in grasses, and you're like, that got completely out of control. Or if you're reintroducing animals, next thing you know, like let's say those wolves, for example, like they eat all the deer. Well, now you have an overpopulation of wolves. So it's hard to find a balance sometimes, and sometimes it might require a bit more maintenance to maintain those. But it's not always a bad thing, and it's a little bit, I guess, unpredictable on whether it needs a lot of maintenance or not.
Right. Okay. Awesome. I think that was all the questions I have. I'm going to stop the recording, but thanks so much again for coming.
No problem.
Okay.